All right. So we usually open it up, really open-ended, and I leave it up to you to discern how to interpret the question, John. What is your story?
Um, yeah, so that's a pretty broad topic, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I started doing all this stuff when I was a kid. So I was I just I people ask when you started or when in the triathlon world I always get the question, when did you get over your fear of, say, open water swimming, or when did you get over your fear of swimming in the ocean or whatever. And so my answer to that is always I think my parents got over the fear of me swimming at some
Uh,
point. I don't know when that was, but it was, at some point when I was 10 or 11, and they realized I could swim a lot better than they could. And I've just been doing it my whole life. So I got into triathlon as well later, but the swimming is kind of something that I just always gravitated toward. I started doing open water swims when I was, like open water races, probably when I was 9 and 10 years old.
oh wow.
I did like the Ocean City Master Swim and some of those ocean swims that were down at the Jersey Shore. So um, that was I would say where I got started, and then I kind of like I was, as many competitive kids were, it was more of a focus on pool. And that's something that I've seen kind of universally, is that it's like there's this big push towards pool swimming, and there's really, if you're not swimming in the pool, you're where are you swimming? And so that there's not that support level, and that's actually built quite a bit since since it's been added to the Olympics. But even now, teams are just not geared towards open water. Teams are geared towards pool. So I spent a lot more time, obviously, in the pool, and just train really hard, train like crazy with Germantown Academy under Dick Schober for I didn't know how many years, but through high school I was pretty much what I was doing. And I started getting into the more competitive distance events. I guess after my senior year of high school, I started doing the national team races, and qualified for the first one I qualified for. I actually made the team, and then I didn't make the team. So I did a 5K. It was a 98, and it was at a freshwater lake. And this was like when really the races just weren't as big at that point. And there was a pack of, I don't know, there was probably a pack of 8 or 10 guys coming into the finish line, and it was something they had never seen before. And so, if you follow the sport now, that's the norm. Like it's more expected to have that. And they weren't ready for it. And so they had the finish line was a boat, and the boat was moving, and it wasn't anchored. And so I was given second place, and I was told that I had qualified for the world championship. And then at some point they reviewed a tape, and they said I got third instead of second. And so I had to kind of start all over again at that point.
Oh
And so
man.
I went back and trained another year, and the following year was the first 25K I'd ever finished, and that was in Waikiki. We actually swam the whole length, really, of the southern part of the island, and
Oh wow.
we spent about 4 hours swimming toward Diamond Head, and then we did a little 5K loop to finish up right in front of Waikiki Beach, and I won that race definitively. And so that was it was kind of a good feeling. It solidified me that I belong there,
Mhm.
and not a bad venue also.
Right.
But at that point, I really, it was the first time I had ever done that distance, and it gave me some assurance that that was a better distance for me. And so at that point, really, I started gravitating toward a lot of this longer stuff. Now, of course, most swimmers that do longer swims, I don't know, yeah, probably most swimmers that do longer stuff also do the shorter stuff along the way, just because it's there. And
It's a training swim.
there's not as much of the longer stuff, right? So, I kept that up, and I did the Atlantic City around the island swim many times. That was a race that I had. I finished that race 7 times, and I was second there twice. And for those people that follow the swim, it's a competitive swim. It was a World Cup swim for a while, and it was most of the years I did it. It was a World Cup swim, and you would always get a real good international field there. So that was a race that was right in my backyard. So I kind of gravitated toward that. But every year I raced at the nationals, and then whatever international race, if I qualified, I'd go to. I was at Pan Am's and Pan Pacs, and I did like 3 different world championships, and I just was always trying to be there. So, and I would say the toughest part was the training. It was the fact that I had a team that was geared towards the pool, and then typically, like through college, for example, your season was built towards late February, early March championship, and then after that was over, um, you know, no, people didn't train. You had, oh, our season's done. We can take a little break, and then we had spring break, and then people came back, and in April maybe people would get in the pool a little bit, but I think we did a lot more dry land than anything, and April was really it was well, you don't have another race until November, so people just weren't really thinking about training hard that time of year. But I had to be, so I had to really do a lot on my own through that time of year, and the summer wasn't really all that different. The summer required just a massive training load, and I was doing a lot of it on my own. Down in Atlantic City, and later on I got a job in Wildwood, and the training options weren't really there, and so I was doing a lot of long swims on my own. Geez, you just talk about how long ago this was. We didn't even have the new wave swim buoy at the
Yeah,
time.
right.
That didn't even exist yet. And I was talking about maybe maybe I tie a kayak to myself, or I do something else where I'm more visible. But most of the times I I just wasn't. Most of the times you're just kind of dodging boat traffic, and maybe I got lucky. I never really had a serious run-in with anything but maybe a cruise shell or something like that. So, um, but yeah, that's a 10,000 foot view on it. I I had a lot of really amazing experiences along the way, and I was able to see a lot of amazing places. Always try to do a couple of international races every year and see where I stacked against guys around the world. So I just had a really great run, and I've kept with it. I haven't obviously been on the national team. My last national team was 2008, so it's been a few years now. But I've kept up doing some of the swims, and I haven't. I've really focused more on the business and organizing swims more than I have actually doing them, and so it's tough. And anybody that's a business owner can tell you that it's really all encompassing, and you well, the way I would generally handle it is I fit in my training when it fits in, as opposed to like, okay, I'm gonna go out and this is my primary thing for the day. I'm gonna go do my 4 hour swim, and that's my goal for the day. No, it's kind of you got to get other things done, and then you got to fit in the training where it fits, and so that's kind of really the way that I've been the past few years anyway.
Hmm.
Especially as my triathlon career has been, you know, well, I've stayed competitive in triathlon, but triathlon has kind of lost its ability to make a living. And so over time that's kind of dwindled a little bit. And this year's been confusing for everybody. So I think where the future lies is about as up in the air as it's ever been, I think. And that's not a unique story. That's kind of everybody right now. So but I can tell you that I love everything that we've done, and endurance sports to me is it's just something special that I'd like to. Uh, I don't imagine myself ever doing anything else, frankly. So, um, yeah.
I have a question for you as a coach also. Do you find like that you can recognize a person who kind of has that endurance like twinkle in their eye that you can kind of foster, or do you think you can kind of push anybody to distances?
Um, well, yeah. So the twinkle, like without question, yes. I think that some people just have that. I think some people. I mean, it's like anything else, some people gravitate toward it and some people you have to push towards it. Um, and so the frankly the people that have that affinity towards it, I are the easiest people to coach. And I know Diane's on the call, and I'll give her a little a little pat on the back here because she's been amazing to coach. She's very difficult to coach, but at the same time, the part that makes her difficult to coach is the part that's the easiest. And so she's a student of the sport, and she wants to know, and she has a lot of questions, and she's always looking for that, like that little thing that she can do, and she's always looking for, and it's really refreshing when you contrast that with swimmers that are like people that are involved in triathlon and have a ton of talent, like just oozing talent all over the place, but they don't have that mental aptitude to go and like swimming to be good at swimming requires a huge training load. And I think more so than any other sport because we're moving around in this medium that's very thick, and in order to swim fast requires a huge energy expenditure. So in order to swim slow, that may not be true. If you're just kind of going through and like moving through the water casually, that doesn't require a lot of energy. But if you want to swim fast, and especially if you want to swim fast and long at the same time, the energy expenditure is just through the roof. And that's proven by a lot of different if you look at swimmers compared to runners or baseball players or any other sport, whatever it may be, swimmers are the ones that really have the tendency to be able to put out large amounts of energy over time. And I'm not saying swimmers can do anything, but if I were to just take a guess and we were gonna move furniture all day, or we were gonna chop wood or do landscaping or any activity that just requires energy, swimmers tend to be the best at those things just because they have the ability to just put all this energy into the water. So most people don't really realize that fact. And so people look at it, well, I was a runner and I ran okay, and I do really well at this, but now I get into the water where it's going to require a lot of technique, and that kind of that skill, it takes a lot more fine tuning, and the technique, of course, is a function of your fitness and of your ability to move that water. So I think a lot of people really struggle with that, but it really is refreshing when you get somebody that has that affinity towards it, and they're the easiest people to coach by far because they want to be there. You're not pulling teeth, and you're not, just it's they want to do it and they want to go for it, and every it's a team effort. It's a like we're along that journey together, and there's no question about it. You don't really question that person's dedication or anything like that. There's good days and bad days like anything else, but there's always that fire to go. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I do. I want to get back to your story though. Can you tell us about a swim that you're the most proud of?
So the swim from a me swimming standpoint, the around the island swim is the one that I would say I'm most proud of, and I did that swim 7 times, and they used to call it the world's toughest marathon swim race. I don't know if that's true or not. I guess I'll go with that because that's what they called it. There's a lot of tough races, and there's a lot of tough. Well, there's a lot of tough swims. There's a lot of tough solo swims that people have done, and I think calling it the toughest race, I think kind of pulls it out of that category. Like, well, the 4 times English Channel crossing, that doesn't count because that's not a race. So, maybe there's a lot more amazing feats people have done, but it was a swim that really it was the whole island, which you have an ocean leg, you have 3 inlet legs. You start in the inlet and you go through the Longport Inlet, and you go through the Absecon Inlet again at the end, and you have this contrast of all these different types of swims. You have cold water, and you have a rough ocean leg for the first 10 miles, and then you have this back bay section where you have tidal estuary to navigate, and you had sometimes very warm water. Sometimes you get 65 in the ocean and 85 in the bay, and you'd also be navigating the way that the currents are moving, and so you'd have what I would call a technical swim. That's probably not a word that they use a lot in swimming. It's more of a cycling word, but technical meaning that there's a skill element that's beyond just going.
Doing it. Yeah.
You have to figure out where to go and how to go where you're going, and when to switch sides of the bay, and what point to aim for so that you wind up at the point you want. Because if you have a current that's not moving in a linear direction, you have to figure out, well, where do you go to hit that spot on. And so there's quite a bit of that. That swim was, this zigzaggy, section through the bay, and they always had parties. They had people would be out there in the afternoon, and there'd be just all the docks would be filled with people cheering, and that, to me, that's also that's something that I think really lacks in a lot of other swims. It's just, and by no fault of their own, but it's just really hard to get spectators. How do you get
Yeah.
spectators to a marathon swim, and how do you get people interested in it?
Yeah.
And I think the tradition there, and the way that swim had been going on so long, and just the history, of the swim, I think really gave it, it gave it that legend, I guess.
Hmm.
So, then of course that last inlet section where I've hit that a few times, where you hit an incoming tide, and you'd be fighting the current for the last 5 or 6 miles, and you get cold water coming in from the ocean, and all of a sudden it's you've been in the bay that's 85 for 3 hours, and now all of a sudden it's 65 again.
Wow.
So that can really shock your system. So there was one year in particular that I was swimming really well, and I had it was a really impressive field. There was the current world champion, and the leader of the World Cup uh, which is all the marathon swims for the year, and both of those guys were in this event, and I was able to get second place at that race, and I think I was probably in fourth or fifth, halfway through the back bay, and I was able to move up through that technical section, which I would say was really home field advantage to me because I swam those sections all the time and I knew exactly where to be.
Mhm.
And it's amazing when you take a little bit of momentum, like you're feeling good, and then you combine that with a tactical advantage, where you can instantly gain 30 yards on somebody just by knowing what
No
part,
way.
where to be, where to avoid that current, and you can instantly gain, say, 30 yards on somebody, and then all of a sudden it's like that that just kind of parlays itself into better momentum for you. So I was able to really um, use that to my advantage the whole way and really move up that whole section. And I was able to pass the guy who, um, you know, in my mind was completely unbeatable. The guy who was the world champion that year, I was able to pass in the bay, and I was gaining ground on the leader, and that was Peter Stoichev, by the way, if you've heard of Peter Stoichev. At one time, he held the English Channel record, and he's he's got a resume all of his own that's really impressive. So being able to being able to compete against those guys, and I think I was making up ground on him in the last few miles. You know, you can see the boats, you can't see the swimmers. So you
Right.
might have been 300 or 400 yards in front of me, but you could see where the boats are, but you can't see the person splashing. When you're really getting close, then you can see the swimmer, which is maybe yeah, I don't know, 100 yards away. Maybe you can start to see a swimmer, but um, that's probably the swim that sticks out in my mind as the one that was the most memorable, and it was most memorable because of how I competed there. So
Yeah. Were you I feel I don't know if it was in the 80s or so. Were you of the era where you could draft behind the boats for that swim? I think I've heard.
yeah, yeah. So that was really unique because the Van Dyne boat was so it's a rowboat, and it has a real big stern sheath, which is basically the back of the boat is kind of a big flat. It actually angles down. It angles out, like so from the back, it angles out and up. So you could almost get underneath of the boat.
Oh, wow.
Um, as you're swimming this way, the boat is almost like above your head, and if you can get really close to them, you can gain an amazing draft. And that's the real challenge of that swim is staying right in that spot, because that's the draft off of one of those boats is greater than the draft off of the swimmer. So to be able to get in that right spot was huge. And most events, you either had a power boat, which of course you can't draft off a power boat, and or you had a kayak, and getting off the stern of a kayak is really not helpful either. So a lot of those swims you were kind of, other than around the island swim, if you want to draft, you have to draft another swimmer.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing that made that swim is really unique, is that it was a purely individual effort. It was a time trial where it's you and your crew, and you're competing against other crews, but there's not directly drafting off of the other swimmers. It was draft off of them, and then the boat gave you more draft than another swimmer could anyway. So
Yeah. I'd read about that, so thank you for getting into that a little bit. But it also highlights the need for having a crew that you really trust and that understands the conditions as well. That where they tell us a little bit about crew for that.
yeah, so because that was an international World Cup event. What they did was the rowers were random, like the boat and the rowers.
Oh,
You'd have a random drawing, and the only guy you had control over was your trainer. And so you'd have a guy that was sitting on the stern sheet, and you'd have the the two uh, the two rowers would be whoever you picked out of a hat. And I think it literally was a hat. Um, it was they didn't have there was no high tech. There was just a bunch of names written on a paper that you picked out of a hat. And so yeah, I mean, most of the rowers were good, and then every once in a while, it was funny because that swim was strenuous on the rowers too. You had I would say every year, and you might have 30 crews or something like that on average, and every year I think I saw one of those crews getting towed by a boat because they couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I will say I've rowed those boats before, and they're very it's a 350 pound 17 and a half foot long fiberglass boat, and they're not the old ones were made of wood, but the fiberglass ones still 350, and they get a little bit of water in them, and you also have a trainer, which sometimes that's another 200 pounds or more depending on who you have. So these guys are rowing a substantial amount of weight, and the trainer is dead weight on the stern, and so that's pushing the boat down. Ideally you'd want to have that weight in the bow for
Mhm.
rowing purposes. You got the weight in the stern, which is all. It's like you're going uphill the whole time, and so and it's a power oriented stroke, so it's really heavy on the forearms, and then also, of course, to do the drafting part correctly, you're not taking full strokes. So if you take one full stroke, the swimmer's left in the dust. So most of that was just these little arm strokes, and so you're doing this, and you're doing this for 7 hours plus. Um, it was strenuous. I mean, you by doing that for an hour, you're like Popeye, like with the big forearms, and 7 hours of that, I think. Now most of these guys were seasoned rowers, so they were used to it. But it was a different type of activity, and so a lot of them really struggled with that. So um, luckily, I never had that. I never had an issue. I always picked a good crew out of the hat. I wish I could have picked my own crew. I would have picked there's certain guys that I knew really well that knew the course, and then but I always got really fortunate to have a good crew and a good trainer too. I went around with Jim Whalen actually a few times when he was available. He was the guy I would have taken, you know, as as the perfect trainer. He's the guy I would have taken because he knows that swim, and he knows the bay, and he knows all that stuff better than anybody. And so he was the guy who was really the legend of that swim. So um, but of course he had his own he had his own life of politics, so not always available either. So um, but yeah, I mean that was huge. I mean, any open water swim that's really important. But I think that one in particular, just the way that there were so many different elements, there were so many places you can win and lose it. I think that was what made that so important. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I'm curious about, you've talked a lot about just kind of the fortitude to get through the really, long swims by yourself and well, even just in like to me, enduring like at that competitive level, like what really drives you? How do you keep yourself going?
Um, I would say for me, it's almost the opposite. I have to I have to not stand in my own way. Um, the driving force behind whatever I do is so strong that, I mean, sometimes it outweighs like whatever else is going around. That's also important. I mean, life balance and all that. But for me, I don't know. I've just always I've always had a drive to do these things. It's just been, I don't know, it's been ingrained in me forever. Um, so I would say, yeah, um, getting out of my own way is probably more how I would phrase that. It's yeah, maybe I'm really lucky in that sense, and that I haven't really reconsidered, and I enjoy that part where you're just kind of um, where you're in the middle of the training and you're just everything's dead and you're just kind of like, yeah, I mean that's like my favorite part, So I've never had really any trouble with that. But then sometimes, for whatever reason or another, sometimes you get in your own way, and that's probably the biggest obstacle I've seen. Yeah.
It's actually an interesting analogy too. I think when people maybe even on like solo swims, and I can't remember, I looked at your long swims database, but I can't remember some of your solo attempts. But when people get in their own way with like ending up ending a swim for one reason or another, which I guess maybe can segue to, is there anything that you haven't completed?
I've completed everything I've started. I've completed. I've never dropped out of a race, or I've never I never started a swim with the intention of completing it and not finished. And so maybe I haven't attempted anything hard enough yet. That's actually that's scary to me, because I know the way that I am, and there's a certain point where um, there's a certain point where there's a danger, to a swimmer, and going to a certain length, and you're stuck. I've probably been close to that point. I was the one year. This is a different year in the Around the Island swim, where I didn't have as good of a swim, and there was a long incoming tide at the end, and I had cold water all the way up to the very end, and I got out of the water and I was cold. I knew I was cold, but I knew I was starting to kind of lose my I don't know what you would call it, dexterity, or I was starting to lose my ability to pull the water, and really starting to shiver a little bit, I guess. And I got out of the water, and I didn't really think anything was wrong. I was just like, okay, I'm a little cold. I mean, the water was cold, so I'm a little cold. That's all. And medical professionals decided that I should go to the medical tent, and I didn't have a choice in that matter. They said, "You're going." No, I'm fine. I just need a hot shower. I'm fine. And they sat me down and wrapped me up in blankets, took my temperature, and they said, "Well, what's my temperature?" I said, "It's 97." 97 is not that low. I'm fine. No, it's 90.7. I said, well, okay, maybe that is low. So I didn't have that ability to recognize that in myself. If I put myself through that more often, maybe I'd have that better. But I didn't have the ability to see that in myself, and so that's when you're really relying on a crew, and you know that can be kind of scary. And so I haven't pushed myself through that line where I've gone past that point. um so I don't know. I finished everything I've set out to finish, and that includes some new stuff. That actually even includes the first time I did the Round the Island swim. My coach, who was Sid Cassidy at the time, had told me, "You're gonna get out." I forget where he told me to get out. Um, he told me to do. He told me to do like 10 miles, I think, we were planning. Well, he was planning for my swim to end in Longport or Margate, somewhere about halfway through the swim. He said that's as far as you can go, and I I chose to do otherwise because I felt fine and I felt good, and I think I was in like probably in the top uh, 5 or 6 swimmers overall at that point. I was beating some of the guys that were like the long time favorites, and I feel fine. I'm not getting out now, so you know, I kind of did the opposite there. I went through and I went past what I was supposed to do there. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question in a kind of backwards sort of way.
Definitely. Um, what about some other swim memories? You've swam all over the world. You've told us a lot about around the island. What's some other awesome places that you've swam?
So I mean, I don't know, Waikiki. I did 3 different events there. That was you know, I've swum many places, but you know, in terms of places I've gone to race and compete, you know, that was one that, you know, it's kind of a really, I don't know, it's just ideal. You can see 50 feet down at the bottom, and you're just surrounded by this natural beauty. Um, Most of the races were in more populated places. I've been to other places, you know, that I've swum that are, you know, I mean, Maui and Molokai and other Hawaiian islands that are less populated. I think tend to be, yeah, be like, oh, like where are we? We're driving 20 miles away from civilization, and we're going to go hop in this beach that, you know, when you look up and down the beach, you know, 10 miles in each direction and nobody's here. I mean, those tend to be, I think, to me, that's like the essence of the exploration of swimming is when you get just far away from everything and maybe even do something nobody's done before. Um, but you know, I did the Ironman in Cozumel, which is pretty spectacular. You know, I've done a couple in Europe, and you know, the beach in Brazil. That's that was that was something else too. That was, yeah. Again, these places are populated though. These are populated areas where there's you know, just these beaches that are just mobbed, and you know it's all exciting though. You know, having somebody go do a race and have like fans on the beach that are waiting for the finishers and cheering is a totally different. It's almost the opposite, but like of doing that solo attempt. So most of the ones I've done have been, you know, geared towards getting getting um, fans, you know, and getting people excited about the race, which is a lot harder to do with than a solo attempt.
Right, of course.
Um, so yeah, I mean, there's too many places to
Yeah.
name, but those are maybe the ones that stick out.
Is there anything that you, understanding it's harder now as a coach and your investment in the sport for promoting it and everything, but was there anything you have your eye on that you would like to do?
Um, yeah, so I mean, as an individual, I mean, I'm probably looking a few years down the road. You know, the business kind of comes first as far as that goes. So, you know, getting things kind of a little bit more on stable ground, which is not, again, not a unique problem, but getting things on stable ground so that I can, um, uh, you know, so that the business kind of runs itself a little bit more, would be kind of number one priority. And then, yeah, I mean, you know, we were just looking at you know, Stephanie Saucy, one of our swimmers, had posted up. She just did swim around Charleston, and said, oh look, you know, there's this guy Alex Kostic. She did this race. You should go race him. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, where does he race? And they started naming all the places. Well, he does this swim every year, and he does this St. Croix, and he does this, and they're naming a bunch of places that were in these tropical paradise destinations, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess I gotta go. I guess I gotta go to do one of them. I guess I gotta go to St. Croix or something
Yeah.
like that.
The horror.
But no, I mean, I don't really have anything in particular that I'm looking for. I right now, I think what I'm focusing on is just continuing the love of the sport, continuing to explore, and
Hmm.
to find new places. And we were talking about camps, doing a camp somewhere. Trying to find a good location for like a swim destination camp, and being able to organize that so that we get enough people that it's viable to kind of set that all up. So that's kind of, I would say, kind of more where my priorities are at. But yeah, I'm not opposed to doing another big event, especially if we get to go somewhere. So that's yeah.
Just two more questions, and then I'll let you guys go for the day. What advice do you give to aspiring marathon swimmers?
Um, so probably a lot of advice, but I would say, number one, practice and experiment, and number two, which is maybe a little bit opposite of advice of that, would be um, listen to the experts. There's people that have done this before, and there's, I mean, the guy Jeff who just swam around Coronado, like we were talking, and he was like, "Well, I'm gonna have 12 ounces of fluid every 30 minutes. That's my feeding plan." And well, why are you waiting 30 minutes, and why are you doing so much so infrequently? Why don't you cut that in half and do it every 15? That makes a lot more sense to me. Um, and if you just something basic like that, without even knowing the swimmer, without even knowing the venue, without knowing anything, that's an easy one. It was an easy suggestion to make, and without without asking someone else, you wouldn't really have that. Because
Right.
maybe when you're training, you might do a 30-minute set, and when you're finished doing that 30-minute set, and the pool might be warm. Most pools are warm, indoor pools especially. Okay, when you're done doing that hard 30-minute set, you look down at your water bottle. How much did I just drink? I just drank 12 ounces. Well, okay, that's logical. It's not an outrageous thing for somebody to think, but you also have maybe 2 minutes in between sets where you can drink all that fluid, get it to settle, and in an open water swim, you just don't, it's got to be quicker than that. And so, that's just an example, but I definitely say, listen to some of the things that the experts have said. At the same time, I think everybody's a little bit different, which is what makes coaching so interesting and challenging, is that no two individuals are alike. So you can come up with a plan, and you can follow that plan, but um, an individual two individuals are not going to react to a plan the same way. So it's important to kind of have a gauge over your athletes and figure out what's working, and maybe even tougher is what's not working, and how to remedy that. But yeah, I'd say listen to the experts, but keep experimenting, and um, keep keep a track of what's working. Log what you're doing, um, and have fun. I think that's the part that people miss. I think that some people get so over engrossed in what they're doing that that it becomes rigid and monotonous. And I think that's probably the main thing that makes people lose their fire. They're, oh, I'm gonna, and maybe I'm speaking more in triathlon terms, but like I don't know. I think the swimming community is a little bit different, but in triathlon, there's a lot of people that I want to do such and such Ironman, and they train so hard and they put so much into it, and then they finish that race, and then it's just like, like just all the wind, all the air is just deflated at that point, and there's nothing else after that, and so you need new goals, you need new things to reach for. So, but I think if you have a deep rooted love for what you're doing ingrained in you, then it's not work. It's fun. So that's what you need to keep. So
Exactly. Yeah, that's good advice. What marathon swimmers inspired you?
yeah, so there's been a lot, you just go down the list, but I would say the one in particular would have to be Jim Whalen, and he's the guy that was in my life anyway, was such a pioneer and such a guy. He was a guy that you know um, he did so much beyond actual swimming. Doing the swim solo, uh, to bring it back, was such a major accomplishment, and more than just the swim, it revived the whole thing, and the city came alive for that. I found, and you know, um, he gave me a lot of advice about, we talked a lot about the swim, we talked a lot about swimming in general, talked a lot about life, and he was a guy that personally inspired me. Um, there's a lot of other guys too. I mean, Sid Cassidy was down there all the time, and Sid did amazing things. He's done amazing things for the community. I think there's so many swimmers that do amazing things, that do these awesome swims. But the guys that I have made personal connections with, I think, are the ones that really are a lot more meaningful to me, because it just goes beyond the swim. Um, how do you weigh like one really really difficult swim versus another? Like they're all impressive. These guys are. You know, how do you weigh doing an ice swim, compared to 100-mile swim? They're just different. Everything people are doing these amazing, accomplishing these amazing feats, and they're all impressive in themselves. And there's a lot of people that aren't at that level, that are doing their own really impressive swim. That's their own version of the English Channel, or their own whatever it may have. So I think there's inspiration all around us. The ones that have stuck out to me are the ones that I've been individually involved with, and the people that I've known personally. And so I think that's just a normal bias maybe, but yeah, I even in the world of politics, I rarely ever met anybody that had a bad word to say about Jim Whalen, and that's you talk, not to get into politics, but that's a tough thing, because everybody in politics, everybody hates somebody, and so to have somebody that was that beloved by all, and has inspired so much change, and he's done so much for the community. And Atlantic City is a tough community. It's not a it's just a really um, you know the community just doesn't have a lot of options, and he brought swimming options to a community that didn't have it, and a lot of people just underprivileged that he was able to inspire and help. So and and he continues to do that. His memory and everything, continues to do that. So that's I think that's when you've succeeded. Is when you've created that legacy, and um, you know and it continues. After you're gone, it continues to inspire and help people. That's pretty impressive in my book.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, John. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Shannon.
Yeah. All right, you guys have a good day. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.